I'm a seasonal park ranger in Redwood National Park. My shift requires terrifying rules. I took the Hyperion Checkpoint posting because I needed the money and liked the idea of solitude. 2 weeks alone in the oldest grove of Redwood National Park, monitoring for drone activity and illegal logging in the restricted zone. It sounded like paid meditation. The HR woman in Crescent City had been almost too eager to confirm my assignment. "You're sure you're comfortable being alone?" she'd asked 3 times. I was sure. At 26, after a brutal breakup and a lease I couldn't afford, I was more than comfortable. I was desperate for it. The drive to Hyperion Checkpoint took 4 hours on progressively deteriorating roads. The last hour was on a fire access route that barely qualified as a path, my Subaru groaning over roots thick as my thigh. When the trees began to block out the sky entirely, I knew I was close. The cabin appeared suddenly, as if the forest had exhaled it into existence. A single-room log structure with a pitched roof, a small covered porch, and a metal chimney pipe listing slightly to the east. Solar panels covered the southern exposure of the roof. A high-powered floodlight on a motorized mount sat atop a wooden pole 20 feet from the cabin, aimed at the tree line. I parked and unloaded my supplies. The silence was profound, not peaceful but heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. The redwoods here were incomprehensible in scale, some easily 300 feet tall, their bark grooved deep enough to hide in. The one directly behind the cabin was the widest I'd ever seen, its base disappearing into a carpet of ferns and sorrel. Inside, the cabin was Spartan: a cot, a wood stove, a desk with a radio console, a propane camp stove, and a chemical toilet behind a plastic partition. Someone had left a stack of paperbacks on the windowsill, their spines bleached by sunlight. A brass bell hung beside the door on a leather thong. I spent the first day settling in, testing the radio, crackling, unreliable, and walking the immediate perimeter. At 6 p.m., I made dinner, ramen with canned chicken, and watched daylight die between the trees. By 9 p.m., I was bored enough to explore the cabin more carefully. That's when I found it. Behind the radio console, pinned to the log wall with a rusted thumbtack, was a laminated sheet. The plastic was yellowed and warped, the corners greasy with handling. At the top, in typed block letters, Hyperion Winter Interdiction Protocol, Level 4, the Deep Shadow. Below that, 7 numbered rules. I pulled it free and sat at the desk, reading by the light of my headlamp. Rule 1. The perimeter bell. At exactly 22 hours, ring the brass bell on the porch 3 times. Listen carefully. The sound should not echo. If you hear an echo after the 3rd ring, immediately secure all doors and windows. Play track 7 laughter distortion from the console recorder until the echo ceases. Do not investigate the source of the echo. Rule 2. The inventory check. At 22:30 hours, count all items on your person and within arm's reach. Write the total number in the margins of this document. If the count increases without your action, identify the additional item. If you cannot identify it, place it outside the front door. Do not touch it again. Rule 3. The light source. Monitor the floodlight throughout the night. Do not allow the shadow of any redwood tree to fall upon the cabin exterior walls. If a shadow touches the cabin, use the manual floodlight controls to reposition the beam until the shadow is eliminated. If a shadow moves against the wind direction, extinguish all light sources for exactly 30 minutes. Do not look outside during this period. Rule 4. The radio silence. Do not use the radio between 22 and 4 hours unless you receive an incoming transmission. If you receive an incoming transmission, respond only with your ranger identification number. If the voice on the radio uses your first name, destroy the radio immediately. Use the backup unit in the storage footlocker. Rule 5. The log entry. At exactly 1 hour, open the logbook located in the desk's bottom drawer. Write the phrase, "The soil is hungry," on the next available line. Sign and date the entry. If you find that your handwriting from any previous night has changed in style, ink color, or slant, burn that page in the wood stove immediately. Rewrite that night's entry on a fresh page. Rule 6, the offering. At 2 hours, place one item of food outside the front door. Close the door, count to 100, open the door. If the food is gone, you may continue your shift. If the food remains, bring it inside and dispose of it in the wood stove. Do not consume it. If the food has been partially consumed, leave it where it is and do not open the door again until 4 hours. Rule 7, the final knock. At 3:55 hours, you will hear a knock from the ceiling crawlspace. Do not acknowledge it. If the knock is followed by a whisper in a voice resembling your own, reply exactly once. You are not scheduled for return. Do not deviate from this phrase. If you fail to respond, the crawlspace access panel will unlock. If this occurs, exit the cabin immediately and walk to the coordinates marked on the reverse of this document. Wait there until dawn. At the bottom, in faded ink, failure to follow this protocol may result in discontinuation of assignment and/or personnel. I read it twice, waiting for the punchline. Some kind of hazing ritual for new rangers. But the lamination was old, the paper beneath it older. The grease stains suggested decades of handling. I checked the desk drawers. The bottom one held a logbook with a green canvas cover, its pages thick and fibrous. I flipped through it. The entries went back years, but not consistently. Months would pass between signatures. Each entry was the same, a date, a time, always one. The phrase, "the soil is hungry," and a signature. Different handwriting, different names. Some entries were meticulous, others shaky, as if written in haste. I found the most recent entry and stopped breathing. October 14th, 2024. 1. The soil is hungry. M. Reese. October 14th was 9 days ago. According to my assignment paperwork, Ranger Marcus Reese had completed his rotation and returned to Crescent City on October 16th, but his last log entry was from the 14th. I flipped forward. The pages after October 14th were blank, except for one, October 15th, same timestamp, but the handwriting was different, spidery, uneven, the letters leaning backward instead of forward. The ink was a brownish red. October 15th, 2024. 1. The soil is hungry. M. Reese, the same name, different hand. I closed the logbook and looked at the protocol sheet. It was 9:47 p.m. I told myself I wouldn't follow the rules. I'd been hired to monitor drone activity, not perform some pseudo-occult ritual for the amusement of bored rangers. But as 10 p.m. approached, I felt the weight of the silence outside. The forest wasn't just quiet, it was expectant. At 9:58, I picked up the brass bell. At exactly 10, I stepped onto the porch and rang it 3 times. The sound was flat, dull, swallowed almost instantly by the trees. No echo. I waited, counting to 30 in my head, then went back inside and locked the door. Nothing happened. At 10:30, I did the inventory check. My headlamp, my watch, the protocol sheet, a pen, my water bottle, my pocket knife, my phone. 7 items. I wrote the number in the margin of the laminated sheet. At 11, I checked the floodlight. The beam illuminated a wide circle of ferns and sorrel, the nearest redwood trunks glowing rust red in the halogen light. No shadows on the cabin. I sat at the desk and tried to read, but the paperbacks were all thrillers about women in danger, which felt a little too on the nose. At midnight, I made coffee. At 12:45, I opened the logbook and stared at the blank page, my pen hovering. At exactly 1 a.m., I wrote, "The soil is hungry." I signed my name, Jasper Thorne, and dated it November 4th, 2024. The letters looked normal, my handwriting, my pen. I closed the book and shoved it back in the drawer. At 2 a.m., I placed a granola bar on the porch, closed the door, and counted to 100. When I opened the door again, the granola bar was gone. I stared at the empty space on the wooden planks. No wrapper, no crumbs, no sign it had ever been there. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the cot, my hands shaking. At 3:55 a.m., I heard the knock. It came from directly above my head. 3 slow, deliberate impacts against wood. I stared at the ceiling. The crawl space access panel was a 2-foot square near the eastern corner, secured with a simple hook latch. The knock came again, 3 more times, then softly, a whisper, "Jasper." It was my voice. Not similar, identical. The same cadence, the same slight rasp from years of smoking in college. My mouth was dry. I forced the words out. "You are not scheduled for return." Silence. I waited, counting my heartbeats. At 4 a.m., I turned on every light in the cabin and made breakfast, my hands still trembling. The next day, I radioed Crescent City. After 20 minutes of static, I got through to a dispatcher named Pam. "Hyperion Checkpoint. This is Thorne. I need to confirm the status of Ranger Marcus Reese." A pause. "Reese? He rotated out last week. Why?" "I found some of his logs. I wanted to make sure he made it back okay." Another pause, longer. "Hold on." 5 minutes of dead air. Then, "Thorne, we show Reese completed his rotation on the 16th. Is there a problem?" "No. No problem. Just doing due diligence." "Copy that. Hyperion, you're clear." I spent the day hiking the perimeter, checking the tree tags, looking for anything unusual. The forest was still silent. No birds, no insects, just the faint creak of wood and the whisper of wind through needles hundreds of feet overhead. That night, I followed the rules again. The bell, the inventory, the light check. At 1 a.m., I opened the logbook. My entry from the previous night, November 4th, was still there, but the handwriting had changed. The letters were taller, more aggressive, the ink darker. It was still my signature, but it looked like I'd written it angry. I tore the page out, hands shaking, and fed it into the wood stove. The paper curled and blackened, and for just a moment, I thought I heard a sound from outside, a low, resonant hum, like a cello string bowed in the dark. I rewrote the entry on a fresh page and slammed the book shut. At 2 a.m., I put out a pack of crackers. When I opened the door at the end of my count, they were gone. At 3:55 a.m., the knock came again, 3 times. Then my voice, "Jasper, you are not scheduled for return." Silence. But this time, I heard something else. A soft scraping sound above the ceiling, like something dragging itself across wood. Then nothing. On the 3rd night, I broke a rule. I didn't mean to. At 11:30 p.m., I was monitoring the floodlight when I saw the shadow. It stretched across the western wall of the cabin, a long, thin silhouette cast by one of the redwoods. But the wind was blowing east, and the shadow was stretching west. Against the wind, I stared at it, my brain struggling to process the geometry. Then I remembered Rule 3. If a shadow moves against the wind direction, extinguish all light sources for exactly 30 minutes. I killed the floodlight, then my headlamp, then the oil lamp on the desk. The darkness was absolute. I sat on the cot, my phone in my pocket off, per the rules about light sources, and listened. At first, nothing. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Circling the cabin, I clenched my jaw and focused on breathing. 30 minutes, just 30 minutes, the footsteps stopped at the front door. I heard the wood creak as something leaned against it. Then a voice, my voice. "Let me in, Jasper. I'm cold." I didn't answer. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing." I held my breath. "You're doing so well. You're following the rules. But you made a mistake tonight, didn't you? You looked at the shadow too long. You thought about what it meant." I squeezed my eyes shut, though it made no difference in the dark. "The trees are old, Jasper. Older than the rules. Older than the cabin. They remember when we were small and afraid, and they miss it. The protocol isn't protection, it's acknowledgment. Every night you follow it, you're telling them you know they're here. You're telling them you're afraid." My lungs burned. I let out my breath as quietly as I could. "You can't hold forever." The pressure against the door increased. I heard the wood groan, then nothing. I checked my watch. 15 minutes left. I waited in the darkness, listening to my heartbeat. When 30 minutes had passed, I turned on my headlamp and checked the door. It was still latched. I relit the floodlight and checked the walls. No shadow. But when I sat down at the desk, I saw something new. A muddy handprint on the window pane. From the outside, the fingers were too long. On the fourth night, I found the second logbook. I was searching the storage footlocker for the backup radio. I didn't trust the main console anymore when I found it at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth. It was older than the first, its cover water-stained and cracked. I opened it. The entries went back to 1962. Same phrase, same timestamps, different names. But starting in 1979, the entries changed. Some pages had additional notes scrawled in the margins. It came to the door. I didn't answer. It stayed until dawn. The bell echoed tonight. I played the recording. It laughed back. Found Mercer's jacket in the crawl space. He's been gone 3 months. The final entry was from Marcus Reese. October 15, 2024. The handwriting matched the spidery script I'd seen in the other logbook, the one that had replaced his original entry. Below the soil is hungry, he'd written. I looked. I'm sorry. I looked during the 30 minutes. Below that, in different ink, it looked back. I slammed the book shut and shoved it back in the footlocker. That night, at 3:55 a.m., the knock came. But this time, it wasn't from the ceiling. It was from the crawl space panel. 3 knocks, then my voice, Jasper, I'm already inside. I looked up. The panel was vibrating, the hook latch rattling. You are not scheduled for return, I whispered, but I never left. The latch popped open. The panel swung down. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the coordinates on the back of the protocol sheet. A clearing half a mile north, marked by a ring of stones and a weather-beaten wooden sign, Interdiction Zone, no entry. I waited there, shaking, until the sky began to lighten. When I returned to the cabin at dawn, the crawl space panel was closed, the latch secured. On the desk, the logbook was open to a new page. In my handwriting, November 7, 2024. 1. The soil is hungry. Jasper Thorne. I hadn't written it. I radioed Crescent City and told them I was sick, that I needed an emergency extraction. They argued, but I didn't care. I packed my gear and left within the hour. As I drove away, I looked back once. The floodlight was off, but I could see the cabin clearly in the morning light. Standing on the porch, watching me leave, was a figure in a ranger uniform. It was too far away to see its face, but I knew it would look exactly like me. I'm writing this from a motel in Crescent City. I submitted my resignation this morning. They're sending someone else to finish my rotation. I hope they follow the rules, but I don't think it matters anymore. Because last night, at 3:55 a.m., I heard a knock on my motel room door. And when I looked through the peephole, I saw myself standing in the hallway. I haven't opened the door, but I can hear it breathing, and it sounds so much like me.